Welcome back. Let's begin this section with a couple of very simple and very easy to understand array methods, just to expand our array toolkit a little bit more. And as always, at the beginning of a new section, make sure to grab your starter files and open them up in VS Code. So that's the folder called Arrays Bankist. And then open up script.js, which is going to contain a lot of stuff here. But for now, don't worry about any of that. I will explain what all of this is and also what else we have in our starter files in a couple of videos from here. All right. So up there we have the application part for the app we're going to build in this section. And then here we have the lectures part, which is a bit more for the concepts themselves. And by the way, this yellow part here comes from a VS Code extension that I use. And I think I showed it to you in the beginning. But anyway, let's not talk about array methods. Now, before we start, let's quickly talk about why arrays do actually have methods. Well, remember that methods are simply functions that we can call on objects. So basically, they are functions attached to objects. So if we have array methods, that means that arrays themselves are also objects. And so these array methods are simply functions that are attached to all arrays that we create in JavaScript. Now, we will learn why all arrays have access to these methods in a later section when we talk about prototypal inheritance. But for now, I just want you to understand that arrays are objects and that they get access to special built-in methods that we can essentially see as tools for arrays. And so, as I mentioned in this lecture, we're going to start by learning some very simple tools that we can use on arrays. So let's start by defining a simple test array that we can work with. And I will make it as simple as possible, just with these letters, because that will help us understand some of the things we're going to do here. All right, the first method we're going to talk about is the slice method. And this one is very similar to the slice method that's available on strings. Remember? So with the slice method, we can extract part of any array, but without changing the original array. So essentially, we can take a slice of an array, and so that's why it's called slice. So array.slice, and now just like in strings, we have the begin parameter. And so this is the index at which we will start extracting. So when we say 2 here, we should start extracting here at C, and then all the way to the end. Okay? And then this slice method will return a new array. And so we need to log that to the console in order to actually see it. Okay? So as I said, this does not mutate the original R array. Okay? Instead, it returns a new array, so a copy of the array, but only with the extracted parts. So let's open up a terminal here again, and live server. And here we go. So this is already our Bankist page, but nothing is going to work here yet. So for now, let's just open up the console, because that's really all we are interested in for now. Let's reload here again. And so now we indeed get this array, which is a slice of the original array starting at position number 2. So 0, 1, and 2, right? Now, of course, we can also define the end parameter. So when we write 2 and 4, then let's see the result here. And so what this means is that just like in strings, the end parameter here is not included in the output. So index 4 is this one here. And so, yeah, as I just mentioned, this one is then not going to be included in the output. So 2 to 4 is really just 2 and 3. Okay? And so the length of the outputting array here will be the end parameter minus the beginning one. And so that's exactly the length we get here. Okay. Then next, again, just like in strings, we can define a negative begin parameter, and then it will start to copy from the end of the array. So -1 will basically take the last two elements of the array, so D and E. And so with this, it's pretty easy to simply get the last element of any array. So if we just duplicate this, so -1 is always just the last element of any array. So this is a very nice trick that's sometimes useful. And now to make this complete, we can also use a negative index as the end parameter. So let's start extracting at position number 1 until -1, basically. So let's see, that returns B and C, and that's because it now starts extracting at position 1, which is here, and it extracts everything except the last two here. So that's what the -2 here means. All right, and if you find this a bit confusing, then just experiment a little bit more with this. Now finally, we can use the slice method to simply create a shallow copy of any array. So to do that, we simply call it without any arguments at all, and then indeed we get here the exact same array. And if you remember it correctly, we already did something similar in one of the previous sections, but using the spread operator. Remember? So back then we did this, so creating a new array and then expanding the original array into that. And so that gives us the exact same result. So the question is, should you use the spread operator or the slice method in order to create a shallow copy? Well, that's actually entirely up to you. So it's just a matter of personal preference. The only time you really need to use the slice method here is when you want to chain multiple methods together, so calling one after the other. And we will do that, of course, later in this section. All right, so that is the slice method. Next up is a method with a very similar name, which is called splice. And the splice method works in almost the same way as slice, but the fundamental difference is that it does actually change the original array. So it mutates that array. So let's again log the result to the console anyway, but now we use splice, and then with the same argument as we used before here. And so the result here looks exactly the same. So this one here is the same as this first one. Let's give it even more space here. But now watch what happened to our original array. And we see that all that remains here in our original array is the first two elements. And so now the extracted elements are actually gone from the original array. So splice deleted them. And so what we can see is that splice actually does mutate the original array. So it takes part of the array and returns it, and then the original array itself loses this part that was extracted. Now in practice, most of the time the value that the splice method returns doesn't even interest us. All we are usually interested in is to just delete one or more elements from an array using splice. And one pretty common use case is to simply remove the last element of an array. So let's actually do that here. So let's say r.splice and then -1. So just like in the slice method, -1 here is the last element. Okay, so the begin and end parameters works exactly the same as in the slice method. Let's now just get rid of this one here so that we see our original array. And so indeed, as we log here r to the console, it is the original array except for the last element, which was e. And so that's exactly what we did here. All right. And as always, in case you want to learn more about any particular method, for example, you can always use the MDN documentation. So let's say MDN array splice. So this one. And so now here are some more examples on how to use this. And so you have the name of the parameters. And actually, the second parameter is called delete count. So it's actually not the begin parameter. So it works a little bit different than in the slice method. So let me just show that to you. So going back here. So if we do .splice, let's say at position number 1, and then we want to take exactly 2 elements. And so then we write 2, okay? And so the result now of the resulting array, it should be that B and C are deleted. Okay, and so indeed, only A and D now remain. Let's log R to the console here to see the process a little bit better. So here we removed the first one, and then here we went to position 1 and extracted or deleted 2 elements. And so position 1 and then 2 elements. Okay, so this first parameter here works the same as in the slice method, but the second one is really the number of elements that we want to delete. All right, so that is splice. Next up, we're going to talk about reverse. So that's a very simple one. Let's just restore our array here at this part so that we can work with the original one here. Or actually, let's also create a new array here. Let's call this one R2. And here we will have 5 more letters of the alphabet, but this time in a wrong order. So let's say for some reason we are working with this array and we need to reverse it. And so that's exactly what we use reverse for. So R2 dot reverse, and indeed it now returns the reversed array. Here I actually want F, and so now it is correct. So F, G, H, I, J. But now what's important to note here is the fact that the reverse method does actually mutate the original array. So you see, as we log the original, it is now reversed 2. Okay, so this one here does mutate the array. So that's important to keep in mind. So maybe you're noticing that in each of the methods, I always mention which one mutates and which one does not mutate the original array. And that's because this is a very important characteristic of each of these methods. That's because in a certain situation, we might not want to mutate the original array, and then we cannot use any of these methods. Okay. Next up is the concat method. And so this one is used to concatenate 2 arrays. So let's create a variable called letters. And letters will be the result of calling the concat method on array. And here we have to specify the second array. So let's take a look. And now we have the 10 first letters of the alphabet here. So the first array will be the one on which the method is called, and the second one is the one that we pass into the concat method. And once again, we already did this before in another way, remember? So we could simply also do this, right? R and then R2. This gives us the exact same result, and it also does not mutate any of the involved arrays. So just like concat, which also doesn't mutate the original array here. All right. And finally, just the join method that we already talked about before, but just for the sake of completion here, right? And by the way, here in this concat method. So if you prefer to do this one, it's of course perfectly fine. And once again, it is just a matter of personal preference, whether you prefer to use the spread operator or the concat method. All right. And now here, let's just join all the letters of the alphabet together that we have here in our array by using this separator here. Okay, and so as you already know, the result here is a string with the separator that we specified. Great. So your array toolset is rapidly growing here. And remember that you already know push, unshift, pop, shift, index of, and includes from the intro section. Now, if you ever lose track of all these different methods and how they work, you can always come back to these videos, or of course, check the documentation on MDN, just like we did here. So no developer in the world knows all of this by heart. So sometimes I even have to look up how the splice or the slice method works, because it's just too many methods to keep track of. And yeah, it's very hard to know everything by heart. But anyway, let's now move on to the next lecture, where we will take array methods to a whole new level.